Broadcasting from Salisbury University campus, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7. Putting Delmarva first. Stay tuned for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It's been a year since the shooting at the Orlando gay nightclub in which 49 people were killed, and it's been nearly 50 years since the Stonewall Rebellion launched the modern gay rights movement. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. June celebrates LGBT Pride Month, and it's been marked by marches and activities around the country. But unlike his predecessor, President Donald Trump has not issued a statement recognizing the month, even as his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, has done so. Over the years, there has been progress, including the end of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in the military and the U.S. Supreme Court decision legalizing same-sex marriage. So what does the world look like for the LGBT community? In our studio this morning, we have Dr. Michelle Schlehofer, an associate professor and chair of the psychology department at Salisbury University. Also, Dr. Diane Illig, chair of the sociology department, again on the SU campus. Together, they developed the Safe Spaces program. Dr. Schlehofer is also on the steering committee of the Lower Shore LGBTQ Coalition, and she's also president of the City of Salisbury's PFLAG chapter, formerly Parents, Families, and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. And on the phone with us is Steve Elkins. He's executive director of Camp Rehoboth, which serves the LGBT community there. And welcome to the program.
Thank you.
So, Steve, I'm going to start with you. I just sort of outset there the what's kind of the atmosphere that we're looking at in terms of there's been progress, but also we have an administration which has not necessarily been viewed as friendly necessarily to the LGBT community. What does the present look like in terms of the kind of progress that you've made in the past?
You know, the present and the progress that we've made looks really good, despite what we're seeing in this administration. And I say that because every poll you see, every time that the national polls come out, more and more people are coming out in favor of not only equal rights for LGBT citizens, but also in support of same-sex marriage, in support of transgender and gender identities issues. So the public, the groundswell is there. The administration is trying to step backwards.
Diane,
I saw something yesterday, or this morning, rather, that even I think the Department of Commerce in their new employee regulations had deleted protection for based on sexual orientation and gender identity.
Diane, how do you see the current atmosphere as we're going into this, these next 2 to 4 years?
Well, I think that one of the things we always anticipate is anytime you make progress as a marginalized population, there's a backlash against that. And I think that to some extent we're seeing that backlash, that people feel emboldened to say hostile things and to do hostile things. And that's where rolling back some of the protections that had occurred seems to be coming from.
And Dr. Schlehofer, what about you? How do you see this?
Well, I would agree with Dr. Illig that anytime there's any kind of social progress, there's usually some form of backlash. And we know that progress towards social justice is not necessarily a straight line. It's more cyclical. So I think that there have been a lot of gains. I think that people are not necessarily going to be as willing to lose those gains now that they have them. But I do see some concerns with the current administration. One of the things that I think is particularly concerning but seems to be under people's radar is that questions regarding LGBTQ status are not being asked anymore in any federal surveys, including the census. And this is significant because really that's our way of documenting the extent of the LGBTQ population and also getting data to highlight disparities and so that we can better serve that population. So the fact that that data is not being collected on a federal level, I do worry that that's going to have long, sweeping implications that are going to last after this administration is not in office anymore.
Well, let me ask you, the two of you here in the studio, because you folks work with students. What kind of sense do you get about the student population? We're talking about, obviously, the administration, a president who's 70 years old and counting, so we're 71, I guess it is now, certainly represents a much older generation. What are you seeing amongst young people, Diane?
Well, I think it's a mixed bag. As has been mentioned, there has been a great deal of progress, and a lot of our younger people are really kind of shrugging shoulders at why is this still an issue. However, there is a very vocal group who feels disenfranchised and feels threatened by this. And so we do have that mixed bag. It's a smaller portion of people who feel like threatened by LGBTQ awareness and growth and access to resources and things that didn't used to be. But as was said, the vast majority of people are supportive of LGBT initiatives, protections for LGBT people.
Let me ask you, either one of you, why do at least a certain number of students think of the LGBT community as a threat?
Because it's a long-standing challenge to their values and their beliefs that they may not have had access to be challenged in the past. They lived in communities, they had families, they belonged to organizations that held similar views, and when they get to college, they're being challenged on those views in an up close and personal way that they hadn't been before.
Steve, I want to ask you about your experience. Obviously, you deal with a wider swath there of a community there, and certainly been highly favorable in terms of the LGBT community up there in Rehoboth. Do you find that there's also a segment, though, that just is not accepting, and why do you think that is? Is it a religious thing, do you think? I mean, how do you read that?
I'm not sure that there's any larger, in fact, I think there's a smaller segment that's unaccepting. I think they're more vocal, as your other guests have said, but I'm of the mindset that when they're vocal, that means that all of a sudden issues that they had kept under the radar, that had been kept under the radar, that they were afraid to even talk about, now they're talking about, and it's safer for us to have people talking than to have people silent but being very opposed to anything we're doing. So I think in the long run, it comes to our benefit for that. I do know that when I speak, I do diversity training every year for the summer police in Rehoboth, the 25 to 30 or so, mostly college students they bring in as summer to supplement the summer force. When I talk to them, most of them are most concerned about, will I ever be able to pay off my student debt? Am I going to have to live in my parents' house the rest of my life? Will I be able to have a job with any longevity to it? I really don't care who sleeps with who and who's married to who or anything else. In fact, probably 5 years ago, we asked the question of, do you know anybody that's gay or lesbian? 2 of the summer police raised their hands and self-identified as being gay. A third raised his hand and said, I'm not gay, but I have 2 mothers. So the tides have changed, and there's no going back. We're going to see to that.
By the way, let's turn to you, Steve, because you have a situation with Martha Pfeiffer, I guess it is, a teacher there at Cape Henlopen High School. She's resigning. Tell us a little bit about the situation there and what's involved.
We're actually at Camp Rehoboth this Monday night, the 19th, I guess, at 6:30. We are hosting, along with the Delaware ACLU and Equality Delaware, we're hosting a student forum, an LGBTQ forum, really to address the culture in the Cape Henlopen School District. The Cape Henlopen School District is where Rehoboth is located. We're really just holding a forum not to talk about personnel issues, but to talk about the culture in general. There's 2 sides to all personnel issues. So I'm really steering it away from that we don't have all the information and are not in a position to call anybody on the carpet or to talk about that. We have, Ms. Pfeiffer has been offered access to attorneys to help her, but that's for her to personally decide to do. What we want to do is to make sure that we have a culture where all of our students feel safe and empowered. But at the same time, Don, we have to realize that these are minors. It's the school district's responsibility to make sure that they're safe, but it's also the school district's responsibility to make sure that outside influences really are not tainting the way they approach school and the learning ability they have and the ability they have to grow in this knowledge. So we want to make sure that we're hearing both sides. I learned years ago when we first started Camp Rehoboth that when we sit down and talk, it's amazing what we can accomplish. We have a lot more in common than we have that are differences.
Well, let me just follow up on that. What is the atmosphere like? I mean, because Pfeiffer, I guess, was the advisor to the teacher and gay student alliance. It sounds like there's some organization within the school district, that there's obviously an open recognition of the gay and lesbian community, and yet we have this tension that seems to at least emerge. Or am I correct?
I think the tension is not as prevalent as you're
Okay.
reading in some of the reports.
Yeah.
The report in the Washington paper was a little one-sided. So I've spoken with other GSA advisors and members of the students that are members of the GSA, and while they love Martha Pfeiffer, and she is a wonderful teacher, a very talented drama teacher, they realize that they do have more support than some people are acknowledging that they have in the school district.
I want to turn to our guests here, because one of the other things that came up here, of course, is the Wicomico County Public Schools, and I guess it was a May 9th school board meeting where some students brought up the idea that the complaints that they had been bullied. I know that the superintendent, Donna Hanlon, did take them aside and talk to them. Either one of you, what's the situation there? And you've heard, of course, Steve talk about the situation up in the school district there. What sense do you have?
Well, I actually, myself along with John Wright, who's our secretary for PFLAG, met with a couple of Board of Education representatives after that board meeting and spoke with them about it. And there seems to be, untangling what had happened in the school obviously is very difficult, and we weren't personally there, but there seems to be from this an opportunity for growth. So the school actually seems like they want to address the student concerns, obviously, and create a safe atmosphere for the student population. So, of course, it's summer and the school's not in session, but we did talk about ways to make that happen, including in-service days for teachers to get them trained on safe spaces, working more collaboratively with the Gay Straight Alliance organizations already existing in the Wicomico County public school system, and other ways that we could increase supports for students. But definitely our local school district is clearly very committed to ensuring the safety and comfort of all students in the district. And of course, there's a diverse student body, so that's hard to do, and it's going to create some complexities that need to be worked through. But from my perspective, they seem to be very willing to progress forward with those conversations and make sure that they're addressing the concerns of students as best that they can.
From what you can assess, from what students tell you, what kind of atmosphere is there? I mean, obviously there's the administration, of course, that's one level, but then there's the students as well. If you're an LGBT student, what kind of atmosphere, what are you walking into?
Well, again, I'm obviously not an LGBTQ student myself
Right.
in the local school system.
But what do they tell you?
But I can tell you what some of the students, at least the population that reach out to PFLAG, share with us. So we do hear reports of not necessarily so much overt discrimination that may have been the case in previous generations, but more what we would call a microaggression. So an insult or slight or snub that may or may not be intentional. So we hear things like anti-gay slurs in the schools. We hear things like teachers that don't necessarily address when slurs like that happen. And that could be for a variety of reasons. It may be because the teachers, don't think it's a problem, or it may be because the teachers just don't know how to respond or what they should say or what their legal rights and responsibilities are. So we hear more about insults, slight insults and slight microaggressions, more so than overt acts of discrimination. But it is a concern because even though it's pretty minor on a small scale, if there's repeated exposure to those types of incidents over time, they build up. And one thing we do know from the psychological literature is that consistent exposure to microaggressions and insults of that nature has the same impact on somebody psychologically as if you just overtly discriminated against them. So even though it's more minor in many ways, it is something that obviously that needs to be addressed in the school.
Diane, why do you think it is that on a public level you can't say certain things, but then when you get to this lower level of social groups like this, for example, where you're not exposed to the public eye, as it were, people feel freer to say things that maybe they might not say if someone was watching, as it were?
Well, I think that, again, most people are not aware necessarily of what constitutes a slur or a slight to someone else, especially if they're not a member of a marginalized population. So some of the language is such common parlance in our vernacular that people aren't aware that they're making a statement that's going to make somebody feel uncomfortable or even unsafe. And from a national level, 55% of students are hearing these anti-homophobic rhetoric from faculty and staff in their schools. So it's not just the students, but it's the faculty and staff, which goes back to feeling, as a student, are you supported in this school?
Steve, what about this idea that we have a public eye, but people in private or casually say things that obviously would not be acceptable if the public spotlight was on them? I mean, I've heard this. Yeah, go ahead.
You see that on social media, especially, where you can be anonymous. And I was having a conversation, have a 17-year-old nephew who's visiting, and we were talking this morning over breakfast about the anonymity, and he's even aware, if he's on Snapchat all the time or on Instagram or whatever, that he's seeing things that I'm not seeing, and he's not really sharing that information. And the anonymity is what's scary. But aside from the teachers, as they were saying, aside from the teachers that maybe have used slurs or don't realize the impact that they can have, these kids are faced with that at home and in their communities and in their churches. And that's where it's really scary that the teachers who are trying to do the right thing aren't always getting, or quite often are not getting, the support from the family structure and from the parents and from others out in outside organizations. That's why I wanted to be real careful with Camp Rehoboth getting involved in this forum on Monday night, that they don't look at us as being an outside entity that's trying to come in and tell them what to do, that they look at us as being somebody that's willing to sit down at the table and see how we can make sure that the best intentions are done for our students to make them safe and empowered. What we're also finding a lot done with the gender identity issues, that's relatively new on the radar for so many people. For years, it was just gay and lesbian, and then lesbian, gay, and bisexual, and finally the T part was added, and we threw the transgender community under the bus quite often in order to make smaller gains. But when people make a mistake using the wrong pronoun or doing something, if they sincerely apologize, every transgender person that I've spoken with says they accept that apology, and they understand that people are trying to do their best. And when we try to do our best, we're going to do much better in our communities.
Well, let me ask you, by the way, Steve, follow up on, because we did a show talking about transgenders, a couple of folks who were transgender. And the thing that really struck me is how quickly this thing has taken off, in which they're now transgender characters on television shows. Big Brother, I think, had a transgender person on their show, widely watched. It seems, I don't know whether it's acceptance, but it seems as if there's more attention now being given to it, and perhaps even more acceptance. Do you think that's true? I mean, why do you think that's changed, do you think?
I think one of the things that in some of these instances, instead of being stereotypical characters, for many years when you saw a gay character on a television show, they were the buffoon, they were the sidekick that was being made fun of, the hairdresser, the whatever, as opposed to people from all spectrums of life. And I think on some of these shows, and having some of the actors portraying roles just as individuals, but not necessarily as a transgender person, and they happen to be transgender, we're opening it up so that we're giving more sensibility to it and more honest approach, and it makes a difference. It took a long time for us to quit using things as jokes and making these people butt of the jokes. And I think the more we do that, the more success we'll have.
By the way, I want to turn to Michelle and Diane, because you folks have created a Safe Spaces program.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about that. And I can say that when I listen to a lot of the media, particularly conservatives, there's lots of critiques about safe spaces. What is a safe space?
The Safe Space program that we have is a series of workshops around making people aware and making them better allies for the gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning, queer community. And so it helps people identify what might be a microaggression helps people identify where some weaknesses are in their organizations, and what they can do better. So one of the things that many people go back, because we offer this to agencies across the state, what many people do is go back and look at their policies. What do their policies have to say? How inclusive are they? And what steps do they actually have in place for handling an issue when it comes up? So the workshop, the main workshop is Being an Ally. It's a 3.5-hour workshop that's very interactive, combines data, but also opportunities for people to really grapple with where they are and what they can do.
So, Michelle, what's been the response? I mean, we think about particularly the Eastern Shore as being a fairly conservative area, certainly more conservative than I've necessarily been used to, but then I grew up in L.A., so what kind of response do you get?
Well, I think the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I mean, as Dr. Illig said, the program is now offered statewide. There's a lot of agencies and organizations, nonprofits, government organizations, state universities and colleges that want this training for their employees, and there's an important reason for that. And it's because even though the Eastern Shore is conservative, LGBTQ people live here. And they have the same federal protections here that they would in any other area of the country. So businesses and organizations need to be aware of what the current policies and procedures are and how they can best work within those guidelines to support not only LGBTQ people, but all of their employees to have a compliant and well-run workplace and a safe workplace for all. So we've done a lot of trainings on the shore. I think the reception has been, for the most part, overwhelmingly positive. We've been recommended to other groups based on somebody will take our workshop and say, hey, we really need this in this other organization. So the fact that this has grown so large, I think, is indicative of the fact that it's very well received and that people walk away with really tangible, concrete things that they can do to make their workplaces more inclusive and just stronger organizations overall.
If I may,
Go
just
ahead.
2 follow-ups to that. One, Maryland as a state has very progressive laws on the books. So comparative to other states, we actually have some requirements. So public accommodations, for example, for trans individuals in the state of Maryland is the law, which many people aren't aware of. The other part is that all of the workshops that we've done thus far are just by word of mouth. We have no advertising that we do around these workshops.
Well, we've been speaking with Dr. Michelle Schlehofer. She is Associate Professor and Chair of the Psychology Department at Salisbury University. Also, Diane Illig. She's Chair of the Sociology Department at NSU campus. Together, by the way, they have developed the Safe Spaces program. And, of course, Dr. Schlehofer is also on the steering committee of the Lower Shore LGBTQ Coalition and also president of the City of Salisbury's PFLAG. Rather busy, I guess you are. And also Steve Elkins, Executive Director of Camp Rehoboth, which serves the LGBT community there. We appreciate you all just taking the time to talk with us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for watching Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Production and audio engineering by Chris Frank. Hosted by Don Rush. For podcasts, visit delmarvapublicradio.net or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast on iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. For the Delmarva Today schedule, visit pac14.org or view the latest issue of the Daily Times.